This is the WJW podcast, brought to you by the Washington Jewish Week and Mid-Atlantic Media.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the WJW podcast. I'm your host, Braden Hamlin, staff writer for the WJW, and I'm here with Adena Kirstein, the executive director at George Washington University Hillel. And Adena has spent she's been there for 7 years as the associate director from 2010 to 2017, and then moved to the executive director position from 2017, and she is currently still there now, and has been involved very heavily in Jewish life on campus, and has been in the news a lot for helping Jewish students and advocating for their rights. So it's a pleasure to have you.
Great to be here, Braden. Thanks so much.
All right, perfect. So the first thing I wanted to start by asking is, seeing how your role as executive director has changed over the last few months, given the high amount of tension we've seen on college campuses and especially at GW.
Yeah, great question. I think every Hillel director would say, unless they started this year, listen, why we got into the business ultimately was to help shape Jewish identity development in our students, to help them think about that bridge between childhood and young adulthood. I think that's still very much the case. With that said, my time has been spent even more so than before on our work with the administration, thinking critically about those off campus and how they're viewing what's happening life on campus. And I think the challenge really is to always stay centered on that identity question. You know, how am I doing work with the administration or with others to make sure that identity development can still happen in a healthy and meaningful way for our students, regardless of whether it's a good day or a bad one.
Mm-hmm. And has that changed in the past couple of months with a more focus on that, or is it relatively the same and that's just kind of how the job is?
I think over the last few years, for sure, at least for us at GW, you know, it might be a quiet period and then an incident will happen and it'll take my time away for, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks, and then it goes quiet again. I think for sure since the 7th, it's been a more sustained level of conversation around anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, all of those antis that take our time, our precious time away. But listen, it's a moment of opportunity. I always say to people lately, never before, at least in my lifetime, I've worked at GW for 14 years, but at NYU for 2 years before that. So in my 16 years of Hillel life, I've never seen a moment where students are thinking more critically about what it means to be a Jew. Why is that important to them? What values are they thinking critically about on the table? So if we only shape that based on the darkness of the day, I don't think we're doing our jobs effectively. We have to be able to use this moment to pivot into a long-term commitment and investment in that Jewish identity questioning.
Gotcha. And that's something that you've seen a lot from students lately, is that real heavy focus on Jewish identity.
Absolutely. I mean, our engagement numbers are through the roof. We saw more students as of January 1st this year than we saw all of last year combined, right? Students are showing up to Hillel differently. They're thinking differently about being in community, their sense of belonging, their sense of a safe haven. They walk in the doors of Hillel, or they come into a Hillel space, and they can kind of quiet their minds for a moment. They don't have to be doing gentle, mental gymnastics about, can I talk about this? Can I not talk about this? Should I discuss this? Should I not? Should I bring this piece of my identity to the table, or should I not? It's just kind of a space of belonging where they're then safe to explore other things.
And so has that been an issue that students are facing on campus recently, is not being able to fully feel that they can express themselves in exactly the ways that they would before?
Yeah. Listen, I think it's a diverse picture. I could talk to 2 students right now, and one could say, I feel totally fine, safe, A-okay, I'll wear my Jewish star anywhere, and all is well with the world, despite the fact, obviously, we have some horrible, horrible things happening. Another student would say, I don't feel safe. I feel like I can't bring my full Jewish identity into certain classrooms on campus or certain spaces. And both of those things are true. I think it's really important. It's very tempting, I know, in this day and age to say, this campus is a horrible place, or this campus really hasn't figured out. There's no, trust me, I talk to my colleagues all the time. There's no campus that fully has it figured out, and there is no campus that is fully doom and gloom. It's all nuanced, complicated pictures in a nuanced and complicated world. It's just that, eyes lately have been on college campuses in a different kind of way.
Gotcha. Okay, so switching topics slightly, with your role as executive director, what are the kinds of things that you guys are involved in on campus? And, because I've seen you in
Yeah.
news articles several times being a frontal face of Jewish life and Jewish activities and anything pertaining to that on campus. So can you break that down a little bit for me?
Sure. Listen, I think people have a lot of preconceived notions about Hillel as being the place about Shabbat dinner and Rosh Hashanah. And those things are still very much true. But I find more and more the modern day Hillel is thinking differently about how do we help students consider the intersection between their modern lives and their Jewish values. Right. So how are we making sure we're coming to them and they're not just coming to us? How are we thinking about mental health services? We have in-house mental health support in a way I never thought about having 15 years ago. How are we helping students read the headlines or think about their TikTok feeds or their Instagram feeds and wonder, what does Judaism have to say about this? Right. So we're trying to create conversations and spaces that are not just, large scale Friday night gatherings, but are also spaces where we're helping them navigate the world and figure out what it means to be a Jew in 2024.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So next, would you be able to tell me some of the more positive developments that you guys have been having on campus? Because I know a lot of coverage, and even so far, what we've been talking about is, a lot of October 7th, anti-Semitism, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me some good news at GW's campus that people are enjoying?
Yeah, listen, I think GW gets a bad rap and it shouldn't. I always feel like there is a Jewish Renaissance happening here at GW. There are lots of different spaces, whether it's the I Center, the newly announced Collaboratory. We have kosher food in-house at GW Hillel and a unique partnership with GW Dining that they're really supporting. We have relationships across the university where we're able to not just invite the university in, but be a Jewish voice across the university. When I'm asked to speak on a panel for an admissions event or to sit in an orientation space, that's not just because they want the Jewish voice. That's because they understand that we are helping to make a large urban campus feel smaller and safer and more meaningful for students. And a lot of our partners across campus want to understand, well, what are we doing that we can then replicate in other places across campus? So some of my most cherished relationships and work are with our campus colleagues who are really both pushing my thinking and really curious to hear from me about what we're learning collectively and how we can support the wider campus community and not just our little corners of the world.
Right. So would you be able to expand on that and tell me some things you and your team are working on to help people across the campus?
Sure. I'll give you an example. Passover is fresh on my mind. In normal times, let's say normal times, whatever those are these days, we would have Seder in-house at the building 2 nights. This year, we're doing a partnership with the Dean of Student Life and her team to have a Passover Seder in a much more public space in partnership with the university, inviting our campus partners, inviting non-Jews to come to the table too, to have like a richer, more nuanced conversation about what is freedom? What are we talking about when we're reading the Passover story? I often think that our inclination sometimes is to think that when we're creating those bridging spaces with other communities, that somehow it diminishes the Jewish content. Whereas I always find with our students, when we create spaces where we're forging partnerships, it makes me think more deeply. I'm born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia. And I always say, if I don't grow up in Roanoke, Virginia, I don't become a Hillel director. So why do I say that? Because when you're the minority, you have to constantly either have an answer, it's sink or swim. When somebody says, why are you missing school the first week when it's Rosh Hashanah? You have to have an answer to that, right? So I often find, for example, for this Seder, my hunch is it's going to be a much more meaningful space if we're sharing it with non-Jewish friends and colleagues, because you have to think a little bit harder about, why am I here? Why am I sitting at this table? What is important to me about this holiday? What is the wider storyline of the world we're living in and how it relates back to Passover? So that's one example of many where we're really trying to be in close collaboration with those at GW.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So, next, one of the final things I wanted to ask was on the fact that, a lot of discourse and a lot of attention in the community right now is being put onto college campuses and, the situation there in air quotes, I would say. So would you be able to describe that to people who may not be super plugged in, have kids in universities, and what you're seeing as a director?
what, what I'm seeing as a director is that there are a lot of, let me say this, it's a bad moment, right? All of us know that. It's not hard to figure out, what life has looked like for the Jewish community since October 7th. And not but, I often find that when bad headlines hit about any particular college campus, whether GW or somewhere else, the temptation is to generalize and to say, oh my God, the sky is falling. What's happening at GW, right? And we forward articles, we want to write an angry letter. And that comes from a really good place of deep concern. And what I always encourage people to do that are off campus looking in is to say, going back to that question of identity development, how can I use this moment to help build up Jewish life, right? So instead of saying, I'm pulling my money, how can I be investing in Jewish communal life? Instead of forwarding, oh my God, did you see this bad news to a student? How can you pick up the phone to someone you might know at GW, a student, and say, how's it going? What's up? And open a door, because maybe they want to talk about it, or maybe they haven't even read the headline that you're talking about, right? So both things can be true, right? We can both be facing really challenging, dark days, and also still find students who are just like grateful to be in this vibrant, wide Jewish community with lots happening and lots of opportunities. And, some days they want to explore what the news headlines are about for them. And other days they don't read the doom and gloom. They're just going to class and they want to be here getting a college education, just like any other student, Jewish or non-Jewish, is getting one. So I think that when headlines are read, and obviously I'm grateful for the stories that are being told, we need to oftentimes bring them to light, because it does help impact positive change. We also need to sometimes, read stories and say, okay, what is the broader picture here? How does this fit into the larger storyline? And who can I call to maybe understand more what really is happening at GW? How is that headline impacting you? Because sometimes the answer for students is, it's not impacting me at all. I don't even know what you're talking about. And other times it's like, you know what? I'm so glad you asked. It's really been hard and I really want to talk about it. But either way, we're lifting students up in our reaction.
Mhm. So, gotcha. Would that tie into ways that people can help students on campus, even if they're not directly connected? Are there ways outside of, money, funding, stuff like that, that can impact students?
I always encourage people, lift up college students, reach out to them, and listen, I also think it's a call. Sometimes I'll give you an example, especially closer to the 7th. I would get a call or an email from someone who meant really, really well and who said, I have zero connection to GW whatsoever. I happen to live in Washington. I've read what's going on. What do you need? What can I do? And that is a beautiful desire. And oftentimes what I wanted to say is, yes, donations are helpful. Yes, if you know a student, reach out to a student. Those are the first two things I always think are most important. But number 3, how is it a call to you to turn back inwards to the community you are a part of, to say, what's going on here? For example, if you belong to a local synagogue or JCC or something, what's happening with the high school students in that community you're invested in, who are one day hopefully go to college? And how can you be supporting that work that's happening? Right. So how can you look in the orbit that there's so much in the world right now. I say this all the time, what is within our control and what is not within our control. And I understand it's very tempting to try to control everything. I think we're trying to do it on some level now. We're waiting out this war. We're waiting for it to end. And we're praying that these hostages come home, but there's so much of it that is out of our control, right? I cannot free the hostages, but I can write to the White House every day. Right. So I would always encourage people, short of checking in with students and donating, to look within and say, how can I positively impact the community I'm already a part of? Because it's all cumulative. We need it all. We need all of that support, but sometimes it's not the most direct line of support you might think.
Gotcha. Okay. So final thing I wanted to cover is for prospective students and families of prospective students, seniors, juniors, all of that, what is some advice that you would give those Jewish parents and students as they're approaching college and maybe Jewish involvement on campus?
Yeah, great question. Big picture, try to divorce the challenging headlines about campus life right now from the wider society. So when I say that, the challenges we're having on campus might be magnified, but they're actually no different from the challenges we're having as a society. How do we talk across difference? How do we come to the table with people that aren't exactly like us? How do we quiet the noise of a very loud minority and not really hone in on the sane silent majority who just wants to live life and go to campus and be a college student? So that's number one. Number two, I always encourage families to reach out to current students. They're going to be your best. Do not trust, if you have a headline versus a student, always listen to the student and understand that student's experience is just their own. They might have a friend who feels differently, but it's just important to get those inputs. As much as you can come visit, absolutely come visit. You know, we have student families all the time who, thankfully, we have a beautiful facility, a new building that opened up 2.5 years ago. They'll get here, I think, expecting to be confronted by some, I don't know, darkness at every turn. And they get here and they're like, this is so nice. All of our students are just sitting here studying, having a snack, having a cup of coffee. You know, when you see it with your own eyes, you understand. And like I said, you have to understand no campus is perfect. I understand this temptation to say, you know, this place is better than this, or this place is the worst. I won't name the campus, but I just had a phone call the other day with a dear colleague from a campus who has been horrifically in the headlines. And I said to this person, you know, would you send your own kids there right now? And they said, absolutely. We still need strong, confident Jews to walk onto any campus life and to be proud to be Jewish. You know, so there's no perfect answer. There's no black and white. So I really encourage families to have a nuanced lens as they think about the future and as they think about campuses.
Okay. I wanted to thank you for your time, and thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
to chat today. I really appreciate all your time and expertise.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.